Friends, welcome to the virtual book club. It is good to see all of you. I am your co-host, Hillary Taylor, and I am here to report that for the beverage that I have tonight is first and foremost a lovely gift from one of my former parishioners, but it is coffee that is a little bit old from this morning. So, Regina, how about you? Introduce yourself to these lovely folks.
Thank you. I'm Regina Moore. I serve as the Executive Minister and CEO of the South Carolina Christian Action Council, could also be known as the South Carolina Council of Churches. We believe in Christian action every day. That's our motto. And our mission is to bring understanding and awareness and to equip faith communities in matters of policy around South Carolina where there is injustice. We are one to equip faith communities with education and awareness. So good to have you. And tonight I'm drinking a little, what is this? It's tea. And it is, I'm forgetting the name. It's a root tea. It's an herbal tea. Dandelion, that's what it is, dandelion tea.
Gotcha. I have a friend of mine who is part of the Georgia Interfaith Power and Light group, and they have a kind of speaking series called Coffee and Something Stronger. And as you were sort of stumbling, I was like, maybe there's something stronger in that.
No.
But it's so good. And I forgot to mention that I am with the South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty organization. Our mission is to abolish the death penalty and catalyze criminal justice reform. Tonight, we are covering the book Right Here, Right Now, Real Life Stories from America's Death Row. And Regina has the book that she's just showed. We are super excited because we have the book's editor, Lynden Harris, with us tonight. And Regina will be leading most of the discussion questions with her. But right now, I would love to turn it over to Lynden and say welcome. And if you would, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in projects like Right Here, Right Now.
Yeah, well, hey everybody, I'm drinking water. So and I'm in Mexico City and just arrived a couple of hours ago. So a little just ever so slightly discombobulated, but delighted to be here. So I am the artistic director of an organization called Hidden Voices, and we're basically a storytelling organization, and we work with communities that invite us to come in and help them share their stories through different kinds of formats. So we do performance, we do writing, we do digital media, touring exhibits, lots of different ways to share stories, because narrative is truly what builds heart connection, as you all know. I mean, it's the stories that connect us. And really, from our point of view, it's the stories that make change possible. We can't want change until we understand why we need to change, you know. And so statistics and data are really, really helpful, but they don't connect us in the way that stories do. So I think it was around 2013, the programs manager at Central Prison Death Row we were working on a project on the school to prison pipeline, and he saw a performance in 2013 from those stories, and he said, would you come in and create a project for the men living here? And I said, well, I tell you what we'll do. We'll follow the way we always work on a project, and we'll come create a project with the men. So we went in and we did our regular visioning circles with the guys, and the goals that they came out with was, they said, we want people to know we're not monsters, and we want to reach people with a voice and a vote. So there were more than that, but those were kind of really guiding principles, goals for us. You know, is that everything we're doing, are we aiming toward that? So that's kind of the origins of the whole project, Serving Life, Revisioning Justice. And the book is a piece of that project. It has a lot of different iterations, you know, different components within it. There are plays, performances, 2 touring exhibits, a musical theater piece. So yeah, lots of exciting things have come over the past 10 years.
Powerful. I have questions written, but now I have a whole other set of questions in my mind. This book is categorized by life cycles. How did this come about? And are the ones who are featured in this book, do they have access to the book? What's their response to it?
Yeah, somehow, I don't know how, but somehow the book got through. Um, it's soon, like the day I pre-ordered it for everybody who contributed around the country. And the day it was published, it went out. And shockingly, I only had one book returned. So yeah, somehow I have no idea. Grace, opened pathways. So the men had copies of the book, and we sent copies to their families too. So yeah, so that's the second part of that question. They did read it, and the book came about.
Author, she wrote it.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Hi,
I'm sorry.
Hi.
that's okay. So for a couple of years, we were inside working with the guys, basically doing storytelling. So I would give them a prompt. They would, the ones who liked to write would write. The ones who didn't like to write would share a story just verbally, and I would take notes. And because, we weren't allowed to bring in any kind of recording equipment or anything like that, just paper and a writing implement. And we also ended up doing art with doing some art with the guys. And then after a couple of years, or maybe about 18 months, I said, I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to write a play with your stories, and you're going to perform it. And you're going to perform it here on Death Row because we got permission for that. So we rehearsed for about 6 months, once a week. And it was really delightful because, so I was kind of crafting this play. It was sort of like story theater. The guys were pantomiming their stories, and the first couple of weeks they're like, almost none of them had even seen a play. No one had ever seen a script. But I would say by week 3, the guys, they were like, oh, we got this, and we come in the next week and the sergeant would say, everybody knows their lines except so and so, this person worked so hard, you need to like celebrate the work he did. So it became this beautiful thing where some of the officers, even, people were coming together to lift this up. And so after about 6 months, the guys were able, there were 6 men in the performance, and they were able to perform it for about 80 fellow folks who were incarcerated, as well as some of the correctional officers, mental health staff, and some administration. And then the following year, they were able to do it for some juvenile justice administrators from other facilities in the state, as well as the Vera Institute, came in and watched him. And just to emphasize how incredible that was, at this point in time, the men on death row did not have phones. They had no access to phone calls, so they were allowed 1 phone call a year at Christmas. So everything was done by letter. So if you can imagine performing your stories for someone in positions of power who's like 6 feet in front of you, listening, and you're on stage, like you're the person with the power in that, and they're the ones standing up and applauding. It was extraordinary. I mean, some of the guys said it was the high point of their lives, and yeah, it was amazing. So that was actually the kind of origins of these stories. And so we had stories that were, so I went back to the original material, just stacks and stacks, thousands of sheets of paper. I put a call out through like Compassion Magazine and some other periodicals that go into prisons around the country, and invited folks to send a story or to call and tell a story. And, what was really revealing about that is I would say 60% of this, what people sent, was incomprehensible, because we house our mentally ill citizens in prison, and some 20% was people asking for help with representation with their cases, which we can't do it. And then the remainders were actual stories that we could use, or phone calls. So these stories came from written material from letters, from phone calls and conversations in person. So that was where the material came from.
Okay, great. Thank you. You've explained this well. I think it's important as it representing the South Carolina Christian Action Council to think about, to know in our faith communities that story is so important, that what we say, theologian Stanley Hauerwas says, our story is part of God's story. And we can see the thread throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the New Testament scriptures, and of course could be seen in the Torah and other religions, the importance of brokenness, pain, sorrow, grief, the emotional spectrum that happens. When you talk about how this writing came about, I was just struck of the beauty of the writing here. Did you all feel the same thing? I want us to go to number 99, if you have it with you. If you don't, it's okay. And if you have not had a chance to read the book, it's vignette after vignette of these beautiful stories. This one it's number 99. I've noted it. I've got it marked here somewhere. It's entitled Dawn. It's short, it's just 3 short paragraphs. And what's amazing to me is the simplicity of it. And you were the editor. How difficult was it for you to edit those things? We hear you filtered them out, the ones that were not eligible for the book. And how much editing went into what you received through the recordings and the written work?
A lot, because, one of those, that might be 9 or 10 pages of text for that 3/4 of a page, that I pulled out. Or if somebody were talking to me on a phone, in our conversations, we're segueing all over the place in our minds. So I would go back and find a theme or a pieces of stories that were within that conversation, and say, oh, this is a story that needs to be told, and pull all of those pieces together. And I shaped it heavily for impact, to make it as brief as humanly possible, to tell that story across, because many of the stories are really challenging to read.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to read this one. It's so brief. It's Dawn, number 99. The day I got my execution date, I learned something that's never left me. You have to be right here in this moment, like a child. They're not thinking about tomorrow or last week. They're just here, now. Seeing a smile on someone's face, the light in their eyes is enough. That's perfect contentment. That's joy. It's taken me a lifetime to learn that life's deepest meaning isn't found in accomplishments, but in relationships. All there ever is this moment. You, me, all of us, right here, right now, this minute, that's love. And that's a whole lifetime. It's striking and so personable.
It's the end of the book, obviously, for a reason. And because the book starts with infancy, right, and ends with getting the execution date. And I will share with you, there are 99 stories for a reason, because when the editor first asked me if I would consider doing this book, I thought, well, I'll pull 100 stories because that seems like a good number, And then I thought, no, we're going to have 99, so it feels unfinished. And like there's another story to be told. It's the story of these men coming home to their families, coming home to their communities. So we'll leave it there, finished and unfinished.
Very good. I'm going to open it up to see if our friends have questions. I want to ask this question before I do that. Here in Columbia, South Carolina, about 4 days ago, it was reported right around the corner from our offices in the Eau Claire community of on North Main Street. There's a high school Eau Claire High School, and 4 of those students 4 days ago were shot. One of them was injured seriously. 3 of them were murdered.
Oh,
And so, as I was reading this book, I was thinking about, well, if they ever find the person who did this and they find themselves on death row, I think about the collateral damage they leave behind of these family members. We're working with parents and staff and students who are grieving and mourning and trying to find answers. Talk to us about the collateral damage you have experienced. Maybe that's not the phrase you would use. As Hillary and I, we worked through our organizations and learning the names of survivors and those who had the family members murdered, and this sense of forgiveness. We understand that. What does that mean to you as the editor of this work?
well, 2 things. One, that so many families are in a dual situation. Somebody in their family is incarcerated for an act of violence, and somebody in their family has been the victim of an act of violence. And you just see that a lot. And that, it's a reflection of the way we choose to structure our society. It's the lack I don't want to get into a whole thing about but how we structure incarceration in this country, how we look at punishment rather than healing, how we don't give credence to change and redemption. Yeah, exactly. Systemic racism, poverty. I mean, there's nobody even middle class on death row. It's poor people, overwhelmingly poor people. And so that's a big piece of it, is being able to understand the incredible violence and trauma that these children lived through, that we allowed to happen. I think is a really important thing. And what we also see is, after there was a reading of some of the stories at an event, and there were about maybe 500 community members there. And at the end of it, it's a beautiful story because everybody, it was students, faculty, community members, at the end of hearing these stories, people were just on their feet. They were applauding, they were weeping, they were stomping and whistling. And we had invited family members who could get to this part of North Carolina to come hear this reading. And they were stunned because at that time, those family members had also never met anyone else with a child sentenced or a sibling sentenced to be executed. So that was really profound in and of itself. And also, nobody had imagined there would be an audience who cared. I mean, they were stunned. So afterwards, one of the mothers came up to me and said, I thought she was going to say something about how incredible the evening was, but she gave it to me. She said, what I want to know is, when are you going to tell our story?
Mm.
And so that's what this musical theater piece we've just finished, called A Good Boy, shares stories from family members with a loved one living on death row, because the ripple effect of incarceration is enormous. There are 10 million children in this country with a parent in the system.
Well, friends, we're going to open it up. We've been speaking with Lynden Harris, the editor of the book, Right Here, Right Now, Life Stories from America's Death Row. What questions, comments, observations do you have? Let's open up the floor. And if you have a question for Lynden, she's got about 5 more minutes with us. You can raise your hand or simply unmute yourselves. Yes, Galen?
Amazon asked me to comment and rate the book and stuff. I think it's probably the most important book we've read, and I've read almost all of them. And I said I thought this book should be read by everybody, no matter which side of this, how you feel about the issue. Because if you're against it, you'll learn more. But if you're for the death penalty, it might humanize it for you and explain
Mm.
you know, bring up some questions for you. So I hope that influences who's ever out there. But also the other thing I was going to say is I didn't think I could read it because reading the first part, the childhood, I mean, the amount of vulnerability. Fortunately, you get to the part, you know, where they're older people, but the children, that's the abuse and neglect
Yep.
these children have been through was really hard for me to read. So, but I stuck with it. So thank you for choosing it. It was really good.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you, Galen. Let me ask you, I see your hand. I think that's
Yes.
Annie Grace. Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to follow up to Galen real quick. So
Okay.
how was this book to be utilized? Who was your audience when you were editing it?
I think really, oh gosh, you know, a lot of times people say the stories humanize the men. And I like to tell people, my intent is to humanize us. The men are perfectly human already. You know, we're the ones who really need to take that journey. We're the ones who don't understand those stories. I mean, it's not anybody's fault. They're not shared. They're not told. You know, so I think the audience for me was particularly students. My hope was students, people of faith, and then the large majority of people who don't actually understand or know much about incarceration or the death penalty or how any of it works. I think there are some people for that nothing's going to persuade to feel differently about it, and that's okay. But I think there's a huge number of people who will feel strongly about the need for change in this country if they understand what's going on.
Thank you. Okay, Annie Grace, you're up.
I have ordered the book. I read a little bit from the website. You could click over and read a little, and it's wow. And then I listened to one of the writers, I believe. Beautiful, just beautiful. And I wish I could buy a case and just hand them out to everybody at my church. We're a very small, rural, conservative church, and there's 5 of us in our Justice and Mercy group, which is anti-death penalty, out of what, 300 people, you know, so we're swimming upstream. But I'm really taken by first of all, the idea of this, and thank you so much, Lynden, for carrying it, bringing it off. It's fantastic, and that's timing is great. I'm just so enthralled with the idea of the dramatic presentation. And I'm going to talk to my pastor next Wednesday and try to sell him on, among other things, us hosting, what do you call it?
Story cycles.
Yeah. So are you part of Hidden?
Yes. Hidden Voices.
Hidden Voices, yes, which I knew nothing about before, and I have a theater background, so I'm just like, oh, and I know the impact a show like that can have on people who are just apathetic right now. So there isn't a script that I can read, is there?
Sure. Yeah, we have different length story cycles, and the purpose of them is that they're just super flexible. So a Sunday school class can read it. You know, you can just, each person can read a story, or you can get 3 or 4 people who are strong performers, and they can just sort of alternate reading stories for an audience.
Do you also bring trained people that have been working with this for a while to
yeah, sometimes it just depends on what's, you know, in a classroom. Like I said, sometimes it's just each student will read one story, and sometimes we'll have like 4 performers. If it's a, you know, big audience, then we'll do it with like 3 or 4 performers.
So if I contact Hidden Voices, I can okay.
Yeah, it'll make its way to me.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Can I ask where you are, Annie Grace?
So I live in North Carolina and I worship in Georgia. So I'm very involved with Georgians Against the Death Penalty and also the North Carolina Coalition against,
Okay.
I split two ways. But my church is in Georgia, and it's just so a lot of retired police who, anyway, I just feel alone and isolated and unappreciated. So being able
Well,
to
I'd love to come see the performance or something. That's
Oh
why I was asking.
yeah. So
But
we're the church is
in
in
Columbia.
Ladensville, which is northeast. We're about 2 hours northeast of Atlanta.
Hmm.
I'm
But
gonna
We're a long
Sorry.
way from Raleigh or Durham or any of the good cities in North Carolina.
Regina, I think you were gonna say something.
Yes, I was going to say that it's almost time for Lynden to go. I
Oh.
think I saw Susie's hand. Did I see
Susie,
your
yeah.
hand?
It's
Okay.
Susie Smith. I had a similar question. We have a theater group here at Greenville that takes on social issues. It's called Glow. And
Beautiful.
wondering what they would need to do to get permission to do a production. This would be something very much like they've done. They did one on George Stinney year before last. They did but they're always social justice issues, and they do an incredible job. What permission would they need?
Probably the best thing to do is just for us to do something like this, have a Zoom call and chat about
Okay.
possibilities and decide what
Okay.
suits them best, because there's just a lot of options. And that way we can
Okay.
figure out exactly what's tailored for them and their community.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
I'll come to that. That's closer.
Yes. Lynden, thank you so much. Let us thank Lynden for being with us. Hillary, any final words for Lynden? Oh, I think Hillary.
I think she
I
froze.
think she's frozen. Okay. Thank you so much. Safe travels.
It was wonderful to meet y'all, and I look forward to connecting further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hillary, are you unfrozen? I think you're unfrozen now. Yes. Oh, I think she logged back. She logged off. She's going to log back on. All right. Until Hillary gets back, what questions, comments, what sparked you about these readings?
I think the humanity, the comment that she made about them not wanting people to think that they're monsters. I mean,
Yeah.
how could you listen to the beauty of some of the stories and words and also the terror, but to feel like they're monsters? I mean, that would be impossible. I would think.
Mm-hmm. Was there one particular story? This is for anyone. Was there one particular story that really struck you? Maybe kept you up a little late at night, or
That's a good question.
took you to your prayer closet, or made you think about it as you're reflecting over breakfast?
I think each one had its own power in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
It's
like
just
the structure of the book too, moving
Yeah.
from darkness toward light.
Right. And the idea that they were all, it's not easy to format the way she did. Some are a few pages, but a lot of them were just short and concise and to the point, pulling at your heartstring, right? I'm on number 15, A's to C equals a U-turn is the note that I made for myself. Someone who's on death row who was a straight A student at one point in their lives, right? And then they got the C, and it just kind of flipped the switch. And I felt cheated, he says, and hurt and deeply ashamed. That was the moment I realized hard work didn't matter. Poverty would win out in the end. My dream of being something, somebody died. That C was my U-turn. Sure, we've all had C's in our lives. One bad day, and somehow we have the wherewithal, the support, the financial means, maybe, to pull ourselves out. But for this one, this person was not the case. Let's talk a little bit about the violence that we found in the book. That there were times and places where, I mean, it was just almost overwhelming, right? Death and violence. I go back
Are you talking
to,
about the violence of the prison system?
we could talk about both. I was talking about the violence that people experienced, but then, and also talking about the violence of the system. We can think about both. I pulled up this resource to think about violence, and I can't think about violence without thinking about trauma and stressors. We all have stress in our lives. We always have to manage stress. We've been managing stress through the last 3 years. Then the psychologists tell us there are degrees of trauma. There's complex trauma, repeated exposure to traumatic events. And we could see through this book, there were so many times when these children and teenagers, one trauma after the other, right? And then there's vicarious trauma, trauma related to exposure to others' trauma experiences. I guess this goes back to this reading where this person had a friend, and a few years later, I heard she died from a heroin overdose. That's an example of this vicarious trauma. Didn't happen to him, but it happened to someone close to him. Might as well it happened to him, right? And it led to violent acts. So when we layer, it becomes compounded, the trauma and the poverty and the racism and the economic struggle compounded. They find themselves, our brothers and sisters find themselves in places on death row. So it makes me think, this book has me thinking, now that we know what we know, after hearing from Lynden, here's the question. What do we do with this? How can we utilize this resource? I could see myself breaking. I mean, if I were pastoring a church now, I kept thinking about, and I know this is not a faith community per se, conversation per se, but I have heard some people mention about their faith communities here, breaking it up through a season of the year that focuses on death and mourning and dying and trying to.
What better than Lent?
I'm sorry?
Think about doing it during the season of Lent.
During the season of Lent that seems reasonable to me. Because it's on folks' minds anyway, this idea of death and life after death. How else could you see this book being used outside of faith communities?
One of the
My
things that
idea
struck me.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sister Pam, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I joined late. We had some confusion about schedule of an event that I was involved in earlier, but anyway, so, but one of the things that struck me over and over again was, the whole issue of parenting. And ranging from the young man who clearly had abusive or negligent mothers or both, and then some of them had abusive and negligent fathers or absent fathers who were in prison. But then also the ones who didn't suffer abuse from their mothers, but, kind of felt as though what they had gotten into broke the mother's heart, but yet they always wanted that and craved that attention from their mothers. So, I think sometimes when we do parenting sessions and parenting outreach too, it's not that you would use this as a primary source, but to really talk about the way in which narratives and studies have shown how influential those parental figures are. And, before I read this book, I had been reading a thing about the psychological effects of World War I and World War II, and talked about the men who witnessed some of the, fellow soldiers dying. Is like, they always cried for their mothers. And this was like a universal thing. So that was one thing that just kept jumping out at me. I mean, amid all the brutality and the generational stuff that happened, the need for comfort from the mother, and the need for a father figure, and so on. And I think some of them found father figures in the other guys on death row. Brother figures, but father figures
Right.
too. I can't remember the name of the man, but I remember the one man who was kind of like the hero of the guys on death row. And then he ended up being executed, and how that broke their hearts, you know.
Yeah, in a world, in a culture these days where thinking about parenting or adult supervision, and how in our culture it's we used to be able to support parents, not so much these days, of correcting a child, or if you see something that's not quite right in the grocery store, we could approach. I dare not do that. I don't do that because it can be dangerous now. So how do we strike that balance, and who is responsible for parenting the parents? It's a hard question, isn't it?
I think if we had that answer, we would try to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's, I think, one of the things that we at SCADP and certainly at the Christian Action Council advocate is we'd probably be able to work towards solving some other problems if we stopped investing in the system that clearly isn't working. That is actually like hiding so much creativity and wasting so much creativity. How could we use these stories in these men's lives to help shape people who are in similar situations as they were when they were children, or similar situations as their parents were? Those are just some of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And how is it that we're just hearing these stories? We see the highlights on the news of the 15-second reel of someone being sentenced. The story behind the story before the yellow tape, the police tape, the story before the sheriffs, before the sheriffs show up. Part of it is, and I feel like I'm just a broken record these days when I talk about the importance of knowing your neighbors and community. And the ability to,
Linda.
Hey, Miss Linda.
Hi.
oh, hi, Linda.
Were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I just now figured out how to unmute. But yes, I have always worked with children. And now that I work with elderly folks also, it's a really thin line. And I have grandchildren here that never want to go home. And although I'm the disciplinary, I march out to those schools when they're doing something wrong. And don't tell me about taking no child down the hallway so that you won't know about it. I do what I need to do, and I get back in my car and come on back home. And I had a lady in a group that I'm a member of. I had two of my grands, and they were running wild. Well, she got upset with me because I popped both of them. And I had to explain to her, I'm not taking nobody down the hallway to deal with them, because we're all here a member of the same club. I used to take my children with me everywhere. So now I do it with my grand. And yes, I make them behave. I don't wait until we get home or after the meeting. If it is so serious that I need to take them out of the room, I deal with it then. And I've noticed that people keep saying, well, you can't do this, and they won't do this because they're afraid. They are afraid that the police will show up or DSS will show up. So no, they don't want to take a handle with their children.
Yeah.
Well, you can interrupt things that you see going on. I mean, in this grocery store or something, then you commiserate with the mother. You say, "Oh, kids are so hard these days," or I mean, you can say the dumbest thing, but it just would interrupt the ugly stuff going on. And then if you volunteer in schools, oh my gosh, the children will tell you everything. They don't keep secrets. So if you get into elementary school, which I did a lot of, I mean, these kids, it's really bad when you hear what goes on at home. And
Yeah.
I've reported some to DSS, but it's pretty bad. And the school counselors will tell you a lot about that. And they don't know what to do about it either, except they said if I can, I mean, I know one pretty well, and he said that if he could just have that kid for 20 minutes one-on-one, that's all he can do. It's just so bad. These kids' stories were awful.
One thing that I've discovered is that here, the funding isn't great for the for mental health help for the children in the school there. And that's something we can do. We can advocate for that. I'm not exactly sure where to start. I'm new. I've just been living in the state for a couple of years, but I volunteer with Homeless No More, and I had a concern about one of the children there, and I spoke with the manager at Homeless No More, and she said, yeah, we went into this school and tried to talk with the counselor, but did you know that the elementary school that these kids are in, they don't even have a full-time counselor. They have one who comes every couple of days or something, and so much of it is just about paperwork. They really, for the low-income schools where the low-income kids go, they really need some dedicated help, academic as well as behavioral health stuff. And that's something that by contacting our local representatives, hopefully maybe we can make our voice louder. I also wanted to say that it's really kind of interesting to me that every time I get involved in a social justice sort of group or something, it is largely women. Look at us. Look at this group. Okay. And the stories. So Galen invited me to this. Hi, Galen. And I just learned about it today. So I haven't read the book yet, but I'm going to order it and I will read it. But the stories are all these men, right? But oftentimes the people who are most vocal in trying to advocate for this are women. And somehow we've just got to get our voices louder, ladies. That's one of the things that somehow, hopefully, by connecting with each other, because we are the ones who like to tell stories generally and like to listen to stories. And anyways, that's kind of a gender thing, but it is true, this part of it. So that's my thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Deb.
Yeah.
So one way to think about this is, who else in your circle of influence would appreciate the book? And Galen, thank you for recommending it. And would appreciate reading it and wanting more information and understanding it. I think my sister would appreciate reading it. Maybe not all. This is the other thing I love about this book. You don't have to read the whole book. You can piecemeal it. You can take one vignette and have a conversation, a 30-minute conversation, which is one of them. So there's so many ways to dissect this. Hillary, I'm going to turn to you. We have not talked about this, but I'm going to turn to you and see what updates you have for us from South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Anything else we need to know and what actions need to take? So I'll turn it back over to you.
I appreciate that everywhere and always, Regina. I would try to bring up my Canva images, but I'm worried that our Zoom would be completely frozen again. So we are not going to do that because my computer just does not have the brain space to do that. But if you are looking at these stories and if you feel disturbed by them, I mean, you should be, right? This is what we've been saying all night long. But as Brian Stevenson says, like, if you feel moved by these things, then, you know, and maybe if you've been reading about these things along and along, then it might be time for you to get proximate. You know, it's definitely one thing reading about an anonymous stranger's pain, which is basically what this is, right? All the identifying details of all these stories have mostly been taken away, except for moments where racism play into, you know, particular stories, or, you know, if the particular kind of geography is important for the particular kind of story. But wherever you are, and some of you are in different spaces near or far away from South Carolina, my recommendation is that you start figuring out what are the ways that I can be most proximate to people who are impacted by the death penalty. Whether that is people who are literally on the row, whether that might be victim family members. Some of you are already doing this work, and I know that because I've talked with you. Some of you may be interested in connecting with death row family members. And so we at SCADP are in varying levels of making those kinds of connections. But one of the ways that is most easily and readily available to you is our Pen Pal program. It's modeled after the Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty Pen Pal program. So a big shout out to GFADP for that. But this is basically a way for people to connect with folks who are on death row, because they're very much like regular people. And largely they've been defined by the worst thing they've ever done. But one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation tonight is the idea that, you know, rehumanizing efforts don't just rehumanize people who are on death row, they also rehumanize us. And rehumanizing is part of our vision statement at SCADP. And so I want to use that tonight. So we have a Pen Pal program. I'm going to type and talk at the same time. You can go to www.scadp.org/rehumanize to learn more about that. We also have a bunch of events coming up in October. If you are not somebody who is connected to people who've been affected by the death penalty, if you are in luck, we have the Palmetto Journey of Hope that is going to be happening between October 15th and October 21st. We've got about 5 events that are open to the public. Several are in Spartanburg, one is in Greenville, and we've got one in Columbia and one in Conway. So those are just the ones that we know we've got, you know, ready-made audiences for. We look forward to increasing those events as time goes by. But if you're not already on our email list, we would love to have you. Simply, if you would just put your email in the chat, and that way I can go ahead and add you to our listserv and share with you the dates where we will have people who will be coming to South Carolina and sharing their stories about being on death row or being a victim family member, a homicide survivor, and also being against the death penalty and what that looks like. We have a press conference for people who are faith leaders or part of religious and spiritual leadership in different communities. That will be on World Day Against the Death Penalty, which is October 10th. We also have information sessions. The first Tuesday of every month is a new Zoom information session. This is for people who don't know about SCADP but would like to. So you can simply go to our website to look at upcoming events, www.scadp.org. And then we also have on the third Tuesday of every month, a monthly organizing meetup. So this is for people who know about SCADP, are oriented towards the programs that we do, but want to be a little bit more involved in the weeds of, you know, figuring out how to use their voice to try and chip away at South Carolina's death penalty. All right, I've talked a lot just now, and we still have 7 minutes to go. Regina, did I miss anything? Is there anything that you had on your mind and on your heart that you wanted me to mention that I didn't mention already?
Would you give us an update? I think we talked about this last week around the firing squads and the governor's latest actions around the death penalty?
I can definitely do that. So, and I see that Annie Grace asked the question, how many are part of SCADP? We have a listserv of about 6,000 people who are on our email list that we email pretty regularly. So that's pretty exciting. Our goal is to get about 4,000 more people. So help us out. We would love for you to connect others to all the work that we are doing. So last Tuesday, I received a phone call from the Post and Courier asking for a comment about the governor's press conference that day. And I said, what press conference? And they said the press conference where he said they have lethal injection drugs. And I cursed and told him that is not on the record. And he said, that's totally fine. And so basically, that's how I found out that the state of South Carolina is now prepared to execute people once again. They have found somebody to make and sell lethal injection drugs to them. Essentially, they had at least one person who made over 1,300 contacts over the last 4 months or so trying to get lethal injection drugs, which is, how would I say, that's actually like encouraging that there were so many people who said, no, we don't want to touch that with a 39.5-foot pole. But it only takes one person who's willing to make poison and to basically go against FDA regulations. So that's where we are right now. We are waiting for Justice 360, which represents the guys who are on South Carolina's death row, to sort of work through some litigation that they filed. They have filed a motion saying that we don't really know what kind of drug, the South Carolina, Department of Corrections says that they have the drugs, but like, is it even the right drug that they claim that they've gotten? We actually don't know because of the secrecy law that they just passed in May. So there's still some pending litigation. And also there's a lawsuit from January that still needs to be settled about the execution methods themselves. Because right now, South Carolina, per our Constitution, can only offer a choice of constitutional methods. And we don't know whether the firing squad and the electric chair are constitutional. They've been ruled unconstitutional by the circuit court. It was appealed and sent to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent it back to the circuit court. So we have no idea what is happening with that either. So this could take several weeks, but it's very possible that towards November, December executions may be scheduled. So I don't want to say we're in the good right now, because we may not be. We very well may be restarting executions. And so right now we are doing all that we can to be prepared for that effort. So again, if you are somebody who would like to stay connected and are not already on our email list, I'm going to put a link that you can go to where you can sign on. Simply go to www.scadp.org/newsletter. And that will take you to a place where you can sign up. It's very quick, very easy. Just share your name, your email address, and your zip code. And that's that.
Hillary, do you think there's any possibility of finding a investigative journalist who might take the story on to try to find where that drug is coming from?
I'm not
a wonderful story.
That would be a great story. I know that there are a couple of people who cover the death penalty pretty in depth, and I'm sure that if they had a source that said, hey, the state is getting its drugs from this place, they would probably report it. But that is a great question, Susie, and thank you. The one thing that I would say we're just aware of is that per our secrecy law, anybody who yields this secret information could be incarcerated up to 5 years. I think that that's the punishment for sharing these secret details of who's making the drugs, how much the state is paying for the drugs, the protocols for administering the drugs, anybody who is a part of the, execution squad, all those things.
Something for us to continue to think about.
You are correct.
or at least some journalists who would expose that part of the situation that we're in, of what the penalties would be,
Mhm.
even to have that become public.
Yeah, and I'll have to ask my friends in other states that have secrecy laws how that has gone. Just because you have a secrecy law doesn't mean your state actually is able to get access to lethal injection drugs. Most of the states that do have secrecy laws are actually, not administering executions actively. So that is, I believe that's true. It's at least half. So that gives me hope.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Hillary. I simply want to say on behalf of the team here, thank you for your leadership, Hillary. You always keep us on track. So it's September. Our next book is in November. Is that right?
No, it's October, my friend.
Oh, it's October.
It's October. Yes. It is a secret, sneaky one because Sister Helen Prejean's team members called me and said, hey, we've got an opening in October.
Oh.
You take it or leave it. And when somebody offers an opportunity for you to connect with Sister Helen, you say, yes, whatever date works. That's what we're going to do. So on October 28th, my friends, you and I will have the wonderful pleasure of connecting virtually with Sister Helen Prejean at 7 o'clock. Be there or be square. I believe that we'll have a couple of our board. I know at least one or two of my board members want to help facilitate that conversation. So please be there. She's a living legend. She's the coolest person ever.
That's cool. I thought you were talking about October of next year.
No, my friend.
It's next month.
I delivered for both of us, partially because our email last year got lost in the thread.
Right. Okay. Cool.
And they said, we'll make it up to you. How about October of 2023?
Good. So let's mark our calendars and invite a few friends and blow up your social media, and let's continue to fill the room. You are enough. And this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's a little after 8. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Stay safe and enjoy making great memories with people you love. Have a great evening and blessings.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.